for coming. Well, thank you for not coming and staying where you are. It's great that we can come together on our lunch breaks to these kind of meetings. My name is Tomas Pesci and I'm the current chair of QFCA. And I also work at a neighbourhood centre at the Calandra Community Centre. I've been in the community neighbourhood centre space for over 11 years now. So I'm kind of part of the pain that sometimes we all suffer and really the enjoyment and rewarding experience that it is to work in this sector. I live and work and play in Gabi Gabi land in the Sunshine Coast. So I say Nara to you. And I think it would be quite cool actually if people could put in the chat in kind of where you are and who are the traditional custodians of that land. I think it would be quite cool to get a kind of map of where we're all coming from. And I think it would be a nice way to acknowledge that we're on different parts of the state as well. I wanted to acknowledge also there's quite a number of people that are joining us from different government departments, both from council, state government and federal government as well. And also explain that this project, this Monsoon strategy was funded through a Commonwealth and State Disaster Recovery Funding Arrangement through a Far North and North Queensland Monsoon Trough Flexible Funding Grant. So thank you so much to state and federal government for that funding. I want to acknowledge Tammy Miles from the Executive Director of Community Recovery, and she'll be speaking a little bit later. So thank you so much, Tammy, for being here and the work that sort of jointly already happened before the launch. And also an apology from Claire O'Connor, the Executive, what's her role, Chris? The
Director General.
Director General from the Department of Communities. Sorry, I just went completely blank. So because they're sitting there in Parliament, she wasn't able to make it. So the purpose of today really is to launch the strategy. I think just in terms of the kind of mechanics of today, if everyone can put yourselves in mute, that'll be great, except for when you are speaking. There will be a Q&A session towards the end, so please hold on your questions until then, or if you must, put something on the chat. Is there anyone phoning in? If you are phoning in, I will be putting the Monsoon strategy on the web page, and then it will be mailed, I'm pretty sure, to everyone that's registered for this session. Also, if you put any questions in the chat, make sure you leave your contact details. We will be recording the session today because we would like to use it for further information and resources, but there will be no identification of anyone that is in this session. I believe we will put a link to the strategy in the chat box, but I think it's going to be, if it's not on the website already, it will be put up throughout the session, so it will be there at the end of the session. So as a way of kind of context as to why QFCA is doing this work and why we have developed this strategy. Queensland is the most natural affected state in Australia. While it is reported that many major non-profit organisations respond to natural disasters in Queensland, the response of local neighbourhood centres and community centres is often overlooked. There's many neighbourhood centres that have been operating in local areas for over 40 years. Conducting community development, working with the local communities, and orchestrating citizen-led solutions for the challenges that those communities face, and very localized and targeted responses. So the local knowledge and relationships means that they are well suited to prepare for, respond to, and recover from monsoons and other natural disasters. As neighbourhood centres are already located in disaster-affected communities, they are often the first to respond with emergency relief and a range of other supports. Many of the neighbourhood centres in the north have experienced a number of major monsoon events, with some of the most hard-hitting ones being Cyclone Larry in 2006, Yazi in 2011, Devi in 2017, and Oma last year. All of these centres are incredibly resourceful when supply chains are cut to external services and are often involving long-term recovery efforts in the years following. So this strategy aims to capture and enhance the experience of these amazing neighbourhood centres and those amazing communities. And also I want to kind of emphasize that this strategy wasn't done as a desktop exercise from someone in Brisbane. This strategy was worked with all of those local neighbourhood centres that have a tremendous amount of experience in how they responded and the type of responses that they came up with. So I wanted to acknowledge all those centres that participated with interviews, sort of forums, engaged with Mengting and the other staff. I want to thank the staff in developing this strategy. Again, I want to acknowledge the funders that this was a jointly funded under the Commonwealth and State Disaster Recovery Funding Arrangements. I hope you enjoy the session, and I'll now hand over to Natasha Odges, who is the Disaster Projects Coordinator. Tash.
Thank you, Thomas. Hi, everyone. So I'll just give you a brief overview for the start of the big picture of the project. So the purpose of this strategy is to promote social cohesion and community integration with response to monsoons through the work of neighbourhood centres. So the focus area is in this black line, as you see around on the map. So it's technically in a far north and north Queensland with areas that have neighbourhood centres in them or very close in proximity, which service and support those areas, particularly in the context, in this case, of being affected by monsoons. So it's been over this year that we've been developing this strategy with neighbourhood centres, and then they're quite in some cases, depending on what context centres are coming from, can be large strategies embedded in this strategy to look forward on. So there's a 3-year implementation timeframe, and we also have funding, thanks again to the Queensland and Australian governments, for a second round from the same funding, so round 2 for the implementation of the project. So it's really fortunate that we're able to have something fairly solid to continue on with, to go straight in with neighbourhood centres for linking further out in the broader community and government sector, LDMGs, the local disaster management groups and the like, to look at how these strategies that are going to be presented today can be implemented. So following on from that, just a picture of the broader scope of how this strategy fits in with the other strategies there. We have completed and launched this year an equivalent strategy for drought in Western Queensland, which was funded by the Queensland Community Foundation. And we also have happening at the moment the development of the bushfire strategy, which was funded by the Central Queensland Bushfires Category C flexible funding through the Australian and Australian governments as well. So these 3 strategies will then form into an overarching Queensland Neighbourhood Centre Strategy for Disaster Resilience, which really puts neighbourhood centres in a fairly solid grounding in terms of having some backing information and considered strategies with thoughts from neighbourhood centres themselves on ways forward to really enhance the work that neighbourhood centres already do in disaster resilience space. So for this session, for the launch, we'll continue on with some more, a little bit of further detail from Mengting, who has been the key person working with neighbourhood centres and writing the fine details of this strategy, putting it all into place. And then we're going to be very fortunate to hear from 6 different neighbourhood centres on there and to present the strategies and hear their insights on what's behind these strategies. And then we'll have a question and answer session. So please have your thinking caps on for if you, as you're listening, if you'd like to ask any questions afterwards. It will be just a short period, and we'll hear from Tammy Miles and have the official launch at the end of this document. So I'll pass on now to Mengting.
My apologies there. Hi everyone, I'm Menting, the project worker for the strategy for Monsoon Resilience. Just sharing a little bit about the process of the strategy development and some of the key insights that we've learned over the last few months. So the development of the strategies has been a collaborative process underpinned by the principles of the participatory action research, and in valuing the neighbourhood centres as knowledge holders of their local communities. We were really guided by that in every stage of this process to develop the 6 strategies and the objectives that will aim to enhance their role in supporting monsoon affected communities. I think it's important to note that the needs and the priorities of each neighbourhood centre are different, and they're shaped by factors including their community needs, their geographical location, existing partnerships, funding, and also familiarity with disaster management. And therefore each neighbourhood centre will also implement these strategies according to their priorities, while recognising that broader support from the community and government is also needed. And in the process of developing the strategy and in conversations with neighbourhood centres who have really shared their experience and insights on supporting their local community during the monsoon season, there were 3 key themes that emerged from the discussion. And we see that neighbourhood centres are often the first and the last point of contact for individuals affected by monsoons, along with other disasters. We see that neighbourhood centres can adapt quickly to the needs of their local community by tapping into the local resources through collaborations and rearranging internal roles where staff resources are available. And most importantly, the neighbourhood centres see that empowering individuals to prepare for monsoon and to build a strong support network as a key step to enhancing their community's resilience. These key themes underline the 6 strategies for monsoon resilience, and for people dialing in, you will see these on page 18 of the strategy document. I will now hand over to the centre representatives to present these strategies. First, we have Linda McLennan from the Hitchinbrook Community Support Centre. Over to you, Linda.
Hi everyone, I'm Linda McClelland and I am the CEO of the Hitchinbrook Community Support Centre, and I'm going to speak with you briefly on Strategy A, communicate the role and capacity of neighbourhood centres in supporting monsoon affected communities. My organisation is in Ingham, which sits smack bang on the floodplains of the Herbert River. So flooding is an annual risk to us in the wet season, and particularly throughout the La Nina, which I believe we're about to launch into. So this organisation has been entrenched for many years in regards to responding and preparing the community for the inevitable event. And what we found is that the community was coming to us. The community was coming to us to look for answers. We were increasingly seeing vulnerable people who weren't coping very well with the event. Some of the locals knew what to do, but visitors and vulnerable people didn't have access to the support that they needed. Over the years of responding to events, we've now been endorsed by the local disaster management group. We don't sit on the inner circle, but we sit just outside that, and we have a critical role in the social recovery group. Our organisation responds in 3 different ways, and that's in that we support the community to be prepared, we help the community respond, and we certainly are very active in the recovery if there's an event. So we launch our preparedness program in November, and how that looks is we distribute information. We host groups with vulnerable people. We actively encourage people to design their own evacuation plan, communicate that to the family, start looking at what they need to have in their households, and to start connecting with their neighbours who are a valuable resource. During the response time, if there is an event looming, we actively encourage communication through our Facebook and other mechanisms. What we do is we have credible sources of information, and that's LDMG and our local council, and we make sure we pass that information on to our client group, which is mostly vulnerable people within the community. In addition to that, in the recovery, we've now firmly embedded ourselves into the recovery centres, and we have a table at the recovery centres and we support visiting services in their activities. And post the closing of the recovery centre, we're often engaged in supporting these organisations continue to address the needs of the last vulnerable people that sit in our community, and that can be up to 1 or 2 years post the event. I can't emphasize the importance of neighbourhood sitting somewhere in this space, and some of these activities can be quite resource intensive, and maybe some neighbourhood centres can't actually respond to all 3 of these elements or activities. But I can't underemphasise the benefit to the community of neighbourhood centres being in this space, particularly in the preparedness space, and encouraging community members to become more resilient and more connected with their community. Thank you very much, and I'd like to hand over to Heather Brown from Collinsville.
Thank you, Linda. Hi everybody, I'm Heather Brown from Collinsville Community Association. I'm here to talk about Strategy B. The need for community planning and working together came about after Cyclone Debbie. Collinsville didn't really have a disaster management plan at the time. This has been a very, very long process, and it is still being developed, so it's not quite finalised yet. But we've only got a short way to go. We've partnered now with Sunday Regional Council to run preparedness, community information sessions. We've got our next session with SES from Bowen. They're coming up to give the community a bit of a talk on how to be a bit more prepared. We took it a little bit of a different approach. We held a garden competition in September just to try in ways to get the community aware and prepared for any disasters by developing like the household safety plan, for monsoons, any disasters really, and it really, really worked. It was just a different way to get the people engaged in something different, something fun. So we also now have a digital community digital notice board in the centre of our town, and it can display pretty much anything. So important messages, in any time of disaster or monsoons, we've found that to be very, very effective. So we can change that on a daily basis. We can put the temperature up there if there's any road closures. And it doesn't just help the people of our community, it also helps people who are passing through to know, if there are road closures or, any floods or, disasters. So that's all I have, and I'll now hand it over to Jill from Mossman for her strategy. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name's Jill Bradley. I'm from Mossman Support Services in Mossman, and I've got the Strategy C, which is raise awareness about the most affected population during monsoons, being the vulnerable individuals, and the value of neighbourhood centres being able to refer identified individual to some local council's vulnerable people register. Additionally, to build the resilience of the vulnerable population through strengthening their connection to a support network. So at Mossman, we value the importance of having a soft entry point, which is provided by the neighbourhood centre setting, which is vital to keep vulnerable people connected to a support network. It is something that neighbourhood centres do very well. Contact with vulnerable residents can be difficult at times due to communication methods. The person may not have presented to the neighbourhood centre for a period of time and may have gone under the radar, or they may not want to be contactable. Phone numbers change regularly. We see it's really important that awareness is raised through a variety of ways, not just electronically, but through printed material, which can be readily circulated within the local community via the local disaster management group and neighbourhood centres, to ensure the message gets out into the community and captures those who are most at risk and vulnerable. As a community centre, we've always been there for people to assist in recovery with regards to our emergency relief program. So we actually have had, we receive a list through council to identify those vulnerable people. But after that, we don't have the facilities or the structure to provide any outreach. But we see that it's very important to have conversations with those vulnerable individuals about building resilience leading up to monsoon. And it's not something that we feel should be left until the beginning of the monsoon season. So more resources need to be available to ensure this occurs. The resources of our local disaster management group in Douglas are limited, and the criteria for their support is quite strict. As a neighbourhood centre, we're not funded to provide an outreach service, so we do rely on awareness campaigns and community to direct those vulnerable persons to our service, where we can make connections and referrals within our service capacity to ensure the most vulnerable in our community are supported. And I'd now like to hand over to Kaz Price at Cooktown. Thank you.
Unmute myself. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Kaz Price. I'm at the Cooktown District Community Centre. I'm the CEO here. And the strategy that I'm looking at today is to continually identify opportunities to communicate and collaborate with local organisations, LDMGs and local council on supporting monsoon affected communities, and for neighbourhood centres to be linked into their referral databases. We're in an interesting position up here, I suppose, that we actually service quite a large chunk of land in southern Cape York that extends from Hope Vale in the north to Woodgill in the south and out to Laura. So we're getting out into the Savannah country as well. And of course, from a monsoon point of view, we kind of thought we were immune to cyclones up until 2014. We hadn't had one for 65 years, so we're kind of a bit out of practice at it. And it was, you know, a community that was very much into eye rolling every time there was a cyclone out there in the Coral Sea, to be like, oh yeah, it'll go somewhere else. As following on, I suppose, from Larry and Yasi and just the immense impact that they had when in 2014 and then again 11 months later in 2015 on both occasions having what appeared immense cyclones heading towards us at the time, really brought into sharp focus precisely how you go about that communications and collaborations. Because of the way that our service runs, we have about 20 or 25 staff here and we run about 11 programs. They are programs like domestic violence, family support, 60s programs and playgroup. So we're constantly in connection with the vulnerable people of those 4 communities that I mentioned. So from the point of view of the database, we're probably one of those organisations that provides, I suppose, input into the databases. But from the point of the collaboration, it was really what came afterwards in that social recovery space that we found our most valuable lessons, and that was about and there is a little brief note to it in the strategy itself, entering into quite strategic partnerships around being able to support people post the cyclone and being able to use those networks that we have established to be able to provide programs and mechanisms that we hadn't been able to do in the past. So, you know, thanks to organisations like the PHN, to Yeti and to the Salvation Army, we grew our capacity to be able to do this and moving forward. And as it was rightly, I think it was Linda that mentioned before, we are heading into a La Nina and being advised that there's going to be additional cyclones to be watching out for this year. We feel as though certainly in that space, we are in a much better position than we were maybe 6 years ago. So thank you. And I am going to pass over now, and I haven't got my email open.
That's all right, Kaz. We'll now pass on to Julie from Mariba Community Centre there. Julie from,
yeah, exactly, for the to talk about number E.
Great, thank you. So my name's Julie Theakston. I'm the manager of Mariba Community Centre. I'm going to be talking to Strategy E, which is titled Optimising the Use of Neighbourhood Centres Resources. This includes advocating for neighbourhood centres to take part in disaster planning by raising awareness within the local disaster management group and the government about neighbourhood centres' capacity and available resources to support monsoon affected communities. The text against this strategy goes on to talk about the key role that neighbourhood centres can play within disaster management because of their role within an understanding of the community. Neighbourhood centres are able to tap into their local knowledge as well as relationships to assist in undertaking locally relevant and responsive disaster planning. I think the best example of this from our Shire was actually around our LDMG response to COVID-19, but I think it translates effectively to our capacity to play a similar role during disaster management related to monsoons. Our neighbourhood centre is an integral part of the Mareeba Shire's community services subgroup of the local disaster management group. And during the period in which our community was particularly impacted by COVID-19 restrictions, the LDMG Community Services Subgroup met either weekly or fortnightly and was able to collectively address some emerging issues within the community. One example of this followed from our local police expressing concern at one of the first meetings that a significant proportion of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community in Mareeba seemed to have minimal understanding of the restrictions currently in place and those that were upcoming, as well as limited knowledge about COVID-19 and the potential threat that it posed. In response to this, our organisation was able to contact Mulungu, our local Aboriginal primary health service, who advised on and provided appropriate reference material in the form of flyers and infographics. And our staff then spent much of the following 2 days door knocking key areas of Mareeba, providing information and having conversations with people about COVID-19 and its impact on the community. Mulungu staff and the local police liaison officer also assisted with that process. That quick and collaborative response was only possible because of our role within the LDMG, our existing relationships, particularly with Mulungu and the police, our knowledge of the Mareeba community and hence knowing the key geographic areas to be targeting, and our credibility and recognised role within this community. Neighbourhood centres are exceptionally situated to provide in-depth insights into barriers that people face in preparing for, responding to and recovering from disasters in general and monsoons in particular. And they also play a key role in building resilience within the community. I'll now hand over to Sandra to talk about the next strategy.
Hi Julie, sorry I was trying to get off mute. So I'm here to talk about strategy 6, which is acquire adequate funding for supporting staff number and wages, and 2, upskilling staff in disaster management to enhance neighbourhood centres' capacity in working with local networks to support monsoon affected communities. So I'm Sandra Elton, I'm the manager of North Townsville Community Hub, which is a teeny tiny neighbourhood centre on the northern side of Townsville. So the interesting thing about our story is it's completely reactive. Pre-2019, when the monsoon event hit Townsville, we didn't realise we were part of the disaster management framework. And since then, our story and our strategic direction has significantly changed because of our experience. So what happened in our case is that we happen to be the only social service on the ground for about a quarter of Townsville's population. And so we found out the place that people come to post-disaster. As you can imagine, the challenges that presents to a very small neighbourhood centre. So for example, our normal pre-flood staffing was 1.5 FTE. That includes the cleaner. And we had about a 300% increase in need for our services overnight. That didn't go away for many months. 2 years on, disaster recovery, resilience and preparedness is part of our core business. So I guess we're a really good example of what the role that neighbourhood centres can and do play. And I guess the scale that they are now. So the things that presented for us In the staffing side of things, obviously with relying on volunteers, we have a fantastic volunteer team who luckily are all North Queensland locals, so they knew what to do. So we were able to immediately tap into them, but with the volume increase that I just described, that still wasn't enough. So the challenges for a neighbourhood centre then is, while you're responding to increased servicing, it's like an instant business expansion. So you've also then got the challenges, if you can, like we did, secure some additional funding for staff, you have to maintain that level of servicing at the same time that you're recruiting, training. We were also developing policies on the fly while you're trying to help all of those people that are crying in your reception. So we were thankfully able to do that because of the support of our community and our extensive local networks. But the challenges, I guess, I think I wanted to make people aware of in this space, things to think about that you can maybe prepare for, is service continuity. So for us, we should have been wrapping up our staffing contracts at March this year, right as COVID hit. So luckily for us, COVID was actually a godsend, because many of the flood affected clients weren't back on their feet, and many were then double impacted. So we're in a situation in Townsville of compounding disasters now, which for us from a staffing perspective has been helpful, that I get to keep those trained staff that our clients are familiar with. So from a preparedness perspective, we're perfectly placed for this upcoming cyclone season. But my challenge that we still haven't resolved is the longer ongoing story of that. How do we prepare when we don't have staff that we can train? You know, what do I do when all those temp staff go away next year? It'll be me and the volunteers on the counter, you know, responding without any actual training under our belt. So that's an ongoing challenge and something definitely to think about. Sorry, I've just made some notes here. The other thing that we found is disaster. Actually, having a disaster is an excellent way to connect people. So there's extensive local connections happening now. The challenge then moving forward is, how do we maintain them? Again, COVID stepped in right as some of those networks are starting to break down and people's priorities were changing. COVID made sure that we all stayed connected, because from where we sit, that level of connectedness with the LDMG, we sit on some state committees. We've just been recruited to a national drought and flood agency to inform those responses, but it's about being connected pre-disaster is really important. All right, that's all I have to say. Thanks, Menting.
Thanks, Sandra, and thank you also, Julie, Kaz, Jill, Heather, and Linda, for all of your very practical insights of how all these strategies have come about and how relevant they are to everyone. We're now going to go into a question and answer session. Just a little bit about that. So please keep yourselves on mute and be ready for the unmute when you'd like to speak. If there's a few people, you might like to use the hands up icon. Neighbourhood centres and QFCA, if needed, will answer your questions. If there's any questions that are not able to be answered in time, or you'd like to ask them in a different forum, please contact either a neighbourhood centre who you're in contact with, or QFCA. Details for contacts are on the Monsoon Strategy webpage. And also, if you are dialing in, on the webpage is an email address for M. James if you would like to email a question that can be put through for this session. So is there anyone who'd like to ask a question? And it's a bit tricky that I can't see everyone's screens all at once here, so I'm just looking across. If anyone would like to even just unmute and ask a question, please do. Or otherwise, if there's no particular questions at this stage, does anyone have any comments of responses of what we've just heard?
Tash, it's Kaz speaking. I might actually start the ball rolling then with some questions, and it's actually going to be aimed to Sandra, because clearly the services that we run are significantly different. And I take my hat off to you to actually be like a one-man band with volunteers. We struggle up here with that volunteer space, but we make up for it by virtue of the fact that we have that 20 or so staff that can be redeployed to do things. And that's obviously what we did. COVID's come up a number of times here, even though it's sort of a monsoon thing. I think disaster. That ability to be able to redeploy staff to quickly pick up the baton and run with another area. But I guess it's a question to you, Sandra, but I suppose also a question to the QFCA around how we, so to Chris, Tash, whoever, of how, sitting within this neighbourhood centre framework, we can better advocate for more comprehensive services, I guess, within, especially an area like that. That strikes me that there would definitely be need there.
As we've been doing a lot of advocacy work because I think we could quite easily solve that preparedness problem with just one more staff member. So of course we redirect, but if there's no staff to redirect, that presents an issue. So for example, probably like most of your neighbourhood centres, as soon as we're in disaster mode, all other servicing shuts down. So our playgroup lady became my other person that was doing disaster flood recovery work. She was completely untrained at the time. We've since done a lot of training. But I think that the thing to consider here is that it needs to be a paid role, because as beautiful as our volunteers are, the kind and the intensity and the psychological risk of placing any of our volunteers in that really intense frontline recovery work, particularly in the short to medium term, it's really intense. There was a mental health need, domestic and family violence. We had homeless populations that came and lived with us. So that I don't think is the kind of work we can expect or reasonably ask our volunteers to absorb when they're untrained. So for example, we have an emergency relief, 2 emergency relief contracts here. I see that if we could, they're also unstaffed, but the increasing intensity of the work that we're doing because of the population we're servicing, I think warrants a support worker, which could easily double as a disaster recovery worker. So, just as simple as myself, 1 disaster worker plus the playgroup chick would be able to rapidly expand and, grossly allow us to respond really well, really quickly.
I think from the QFCA's,
Thanks, Sandra, and yeah, Chris.
The QFCA's point of view is that's one of the reasons why we really wanted to get alongside neighbourhood centres with this monsoon strategy, so we could really have a look at what the issues are that neighbourhood centres are experiencing, and then present that evidence to other parties who might be interested in filling in some of those gaps that neighbourhood centres might be experiencing.
I think one other aspect here with all of these strategies, as well as what's just been asked, is about that relationship with the local disaster management groups. The greater that relationship is from the neighbourhood centres themselves in those circles, can be just so valuable and relevant for being able to progress the resourcing of the centres as well. So there may be other ways. It may not be a direct staffing issue. It may be collaborating and sharing resources. Is there someone that can switch over to another organisation that's in the disaster management networks? Or is there other resourcing, shared resourcing ways to support in that local level as well? Does anyone else have any other comments on that question? Okay.
Hi, my name is John. Can you see me?
Go, John.
Just need a bit more volume there.
Hi, my name is John.
Hi, John.
Can you see me and can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Look, I work for the LCSA, which is the Local Community Services Association, which is QFCA's sister organisation in New South Wales. So we're the peak body for neighbourhood centres in New South Wales. And first of all, I just want to commend you on this report, on the launch, and all the terrific presentations of what what you are doing in times of disaster. I just wanted to share with you a quick reflection and then ask you a question, if you allow me. We have recently also done some research in the disaster and the resilience to disaster report is the result of it. And I'm happy to share a link so you can have a look at that report. But what we found is that, first of all, there is 3 stages to every disaster, and that is the readiness and preparedness, there is the immediate response, and then there's the long-term recovery. And our research has shown that it is actually in the immediate response stage that it's almost emergency relief and like a hierarchical leadership that's required. You know, people need to know where they go, what to do, where they find the answers for their immediate issues. But it's in stage 1 and 3 that it's actually much more community-led, community development leadership model that is required. So that's a reflection that I've been grappling with a lot, because that seems to be something that our government here in New South Wales does not understand. So it's like, they bombard us with funding and with resources when things are really dire and when things just happened. But as soon as the media is gone and the emergency services have left, the communities are often left to themselves to actually deal with the long-term recovery. And to get investment into that recovery stage from a community-led perspective is a problem here in New South Wales. So I'm first of all wondering whether in Queensland you feel like you have recognition by government that community-led approaches are required in the long-term recovery. And then the second question I wanted to put to either QFCA or anyone is that, have you noticed something that we call the compounding effect? Because the compounding effect is that disasters can happen and overlap more than one disaster in any given time. So you can be in a drought, then hit by a flood, then a bushfire comes, and then on top of that you are in a pandemic. And each of those disasters can be at different stages. So while you get ready for the floods, you are recovering from the bushfires, and you are actually in the immediate response to a pandemic. And that's again a complexity that our government does not understand, that there is a compounding effect. And again, I wondered whether you in Queensland have had similar conversations or more traction with your government.
Would anyone like to jump in there?
So we have seen compounding disasters, like I mentioned, with the floods, then COVID. Luckily, we didn't have any cyclones last season because I worry what that would have represented. What we're seeing now, 2 years post-flood, is a decreased resilience in our clients. So, for example, the crime rate up here has impacted some of our clients who were flood affected, then COVID affected, and that resilience and even just being able to respond to that is just not there. So, that's the complexity, I guess it brings the mental health risk up the list of priorities. So a lot of the work that we're doing now with Queensland Health, we've just got some contracts on board to fortify that mental health support and local access, because that's a gap that we're seeing. COVID has obviously affected mental health impact, but that overlaying of complexity is certainly being felt in our populations for sure.
What I've seen in my community, flooding events, Yasi was significant, but flooding events, I think on average we have them maybe every 3 years. And when I say a flooding event, our neighbourhood centre, the water goes through our neighbourhood centre. We try and keep it out, but we're not always successful. One particular year it caught us by surprise and we lost every piece of furniture in our neighbourhood centre, and we were relocated into the Hinchram Shire Council. What we discovered then, we did a lot of research and we looked professionally for international research, and we uncovered a lot of information around how people respond post-disaster, and it became really obvious to us that people needed a steady state, a steady place where they went looking for support. So the idea that our neighbourhood centre was locked up and boarded up because it had, 3 foot of flood water through it wasn't acceptable. my organisation had to seek funds elsewhere to get the neighbourhood. So now we have two buildings. We have the one that the organisation has purchased for itself, that is floodproof, and the neighbourhood centre that we still use. It's use or lose, I think. We still keep, but the impact is there. Every year the impact is potential there for that building to go underwater. So I suppose some of the learnings though is that every time we respond to a disaster, our steady state changes. We never go back to being quiet. So every disaster we respond to, we get busier, and it never goes back from that. There's an increasing demand on us. It's very respectful. The government now basically post a disaster. I might get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon saying, can you tender for this? You've got 2 hours. And so we've established a very good relationship with state government, and, you know, I think it's a very professional and valued relationship, but that gives us the capacity to respond very quickly and to design a service response really quickly. But a word of caution, every disaster is different. So while you have a set of skills that you can transport across different disasters, a cyclone, a large cyclone like Yasi was very different to an annual flooding event in its scope, in its impact, in every way. So after Yasi, we had staff who were continuing to come to work every day, but were going home to houses with no power. So, I suppose the cautionary note there is that we need to always, in some extent, rely on visiting services, outside services to come and support us, because the fatigue of us doing too much is really real. And realising that every disaster could be slightly different, and while we can respond to some disasters, our ability to respond to others might be slightly different. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Linda. That was very positive to hear as well overall. We are now at the end of the question and answer timing. If anyone is burning to say anything, please speak now. Otherwise, we'll move on to the last stage.
Just
sorry, Natasha. I just wanted to say that I put up a link in the chat box to the report that I mentioned you might be interested in.
Thank you, Ken.
Just a quick comment. It's Tash Donaldson from GovX and the federal government. We've just finished a piece on experiencing natural disasters. And at the same time as we were finishing, Royal Commission came out with its recommendations on natural disasters, as well as CSIRO and the BOM putting out their state of the environment. It's fantastic what you guys are doing. And it's been recognised across all of these different reports that, first of all, we're going to get more severe and more compounding disasters happening in the future, and that the communities are the basis of everything. So there's been recommendations to put more into resilience too, as well as the recovery side. So just wanted to mention that it's great what you're all doing.
Thank you very much, Ash.
Thank you.
Good to hear from you. Thank you. I'll pass on now to Thomas.
Thank you all for the questions, the comments, and for the 6 centres that presented their story. And just, yeah, again, encourage you, if you got more questions or comments, to just direct it through one of the staff or through the QFCA website, their webpage contact. The report is definitely up on the website already, so you can have a look at that online or download it. What I would like to do now is to introduce and ask Tammy Miles, who is Executive Director of Community Recovery, to say a few words, make a comment, and then I'll ask you, Tammy, to officially launch the report. So perhaps when you say the magic words and launch it, we can all put ourselves off mute and clap, cheer, throw the children in the air or something. I'll pass it on to you, Tammy.
Thank you very much. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to come along this afternoon and participate in your launch. In addition to my role in disasters, what many of you won't know is many years ago in my early career, I used to manage a neighbourhood centre. So I have a very strong appreciation of the critical role that neighbourhood centres do play in the fabric of communities. So greatly appreciated. Can I say congratulations to all involved in the development of the Monsoon Resilience strategy. I think it's a fabulous example of how collaboration and the sharing of knowledge and experience can really support and build the capacity across the broader network of neighbourhood centres, but more importantly, will also create the opportunity for you to showcase the role that you do and can play in disasters, whether it be from preparedness, response, recovery, or into future community development and resilience going forward. I personally know from experience that many of the neighbourhood centres, both in the monsoon, but also I think as you were mentioning in the bushfire responses, as well as the drought area, are playing very significant roles in supporting this important work. Thank you to all of the presenters who particularly shared their stories. I did know a couple of your stories quite well. So while I'm based down here in Brisbane, it is often my staff that you're working with in terms of the local human and social recovery responses. Really fantastic to see the partnerships and relationships that many of you are already establishing with disaster management groups. Similar to Natasha, I would say that is one of the most critical things as a neighbourhood centre you can do, is to create those links and relationships, as that is kind of the avenue of how you will be able to, I guess, continue to play a role and leverage support and resourcing across that. Similar to Ash, I too would acknowledge that as a result of the recent seasons, you know, there is a strong interest coming in terms of greater investment in that resilience and preparedness space. So I think the strategy that you've outlined will really position you well in that regard. I'm also really pleased to see that this strategy is part of a broader disaster resilience strategy where you are looking at other hazards and how they're affecting the community. And I can kind of see that you have got that overarching vision of how that will all come together as well. I'm really looking forward to, I guess, seeing what opportunities arise as you now move forward with the implementation. So well done, everyone. Now, do you want me to go into the official launch now, or did you want to do the picture? Okay, that being the case, I will then just say I officially launched the Queensland Neighbourhood Centre Strategy for Monsoon Resilience. Well done, everyone.
Thank you so much, Tammy, and again, I acknowledge that the working relationship with both the state and federal government on bringing this together. Just wanted to also acknowledge, I noticed when people have been putting on the chat where they come from, there was quite a few people from New South Wales, and thank you, Jan, for being here. I also noticed that there's a couple of people, Cameron and someone else from Victoria. I imagine that you're not here because you care about monsoons. I imagine you're here because you all want to move to Queensland and you're trying to figure out the best time and places to go. But thank you for being with us anyway from all the southern states. It's always nice to share our work, and also we always learn from each other in this space. Thank you all for coming. This sort of concludes the official part. If anyone wants to kind of hang around for a little bit and chat with some of the QFCA staff, you most certainly can. But thank you all for coming. Thank you for all the individual centres that contributed to the strategy, and also for the ones that are sort of here and just came to have a look-see and wonder what else you can do with this report. It's really a usable report for your organisation, and it's also a good tool to go and talk to your local disaster group if you're not involved with them, to present it, to table it, to speak with your councillor, State Department representative, and emphasise the role that neighbourhood centres play, and that it's very well to acknowledge the important role that communities play, but that takes resourcing, and we need to be brave enough to ask for those resources and say, great, there's been a Royal Commission, you're saying that that we need to look at the value of it, but then it's got a value, and we need to be brave in asking for that, and certainly QFCA will be doing that. So use the report, share it with others, and let's celebrate this achievement. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Well done.
Thank you, everyone.